Is this still the pinned one that you see? We are live. Warm welcome from the Springer Schlössl in Vienna to our final conference of our project From Fictional to Functioning Democracy. My name is Sebastian Schaefer, and I'm the Managing Director of the Institute for the Danube region in Central Europe. We are, as it has been the case with this project, in a bit of a pickle because there are unforeseen things that are happening, not only to our democracy, but also to how we have planned everything with regards to this conference. Nevertheless, we have brought together a fantastic program. I say welcome to everyone who joins us online, be it in the webinar or through the live stream. I'm especially happy that we have a full seminar room here in the Springer Schlössl. I will be talking a little bit more later, but without further ado, I'm very, very happy that we have with us Daniela INGRUBER, who will be giving us the keynote lecture today. And in order not to take too much time away, I would immediately say, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schaefer. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here, actually stepping in. So this was one of the unforeseen things. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion and everything. As so many things were unforeseen, also our technology or my technology did not work so well. So Mr. Schaefer will have to help me with the PowerPoint. Thank you very much. So I'm from the University for Continuing Education, Krems, and my special fields are democracy and war research. And I was free to give a name to my keynote, and I decided to call it Democracy Dies in Darkness. Does it really? And I can tell you already now that I don't think it will. So if you could go to the next slide, maybe we should arrange a sign that I give you so that maybe I do something like that, or I don't know. I'll tell you. Anyway, so I think that democracy, if it is going to die, it will do so with a clash. It will do so in a loud way. And we can see in this cartoon that it is already happening, and it is not only happening in Turkey, it is happening in many, many countries, as we know, in very, very special levels. And next slide, please. And it is also happening in the USA, where one could say that tiny pieces of the democracy are being cut out. So it is not only about the populism that we see in Europe, like in Hungary or in Turkey and some other countries, but it is also right now a struggle between morality versus ethics. And very often morality is something that is about us. So how I feel, how I want the world to be looking at. And obviously this is something that is happening for some parts of the population in the USA right now. So I would say it is really going into a struggle between autocracy and democracy. Next slide, please. But the population is no longer ready to stand still, and people do want to stand up to fight against kind of populism, but also especially against this struggle that the democracy is in. So they want to fight for their own freedoms. We have seen that a lot during the pandemic, but we also see it now towards climate change, in the beliefs that the people have. We are going into that. So what people believe in the media. And the thing is that in former times, people were fighting for something and they were demonstrating for something. Right now, we can rather see it that people fight against something. And this has to do with the fact that there are less and less ideologies. And on the other hand, there is also some kind of readiness to even use violence. I would not say that those ladies here use it, but in the next picture, we can see that people are ready to use violence. So next slide, please. And the next one, please. Sorry, next one. That should have been, yes, thank you. So, of course, we have been talking about that on a nearly worldwide level, that very, very special day in the USA just a little bit more than a year ago. And the question that is still in discussion is, was this in the name of democracy or was it in the name of something else? Next slide. And if we look at the news right now, we see a completely different picture, and I'm absolutely fascinated by what we see in Sri Lanka right now. And in this picture, we can see that people are patiently waiting. And they are there, they are showing that they are present, they are showing that they are willing to change something in the country, and they're really, really strong. But so far, more or less, it has happened without violence. So that could be a new way of dealing with the problems. And if that was the case, then of course, democracy is not so much in danger, and maybe in the end, really the people could win, which as soon as violence is there, of course, it is never the people who win. Next slide, please. So right now we hear it very often that we are living in an era of crisis. There are different pandemics, more to come as we hear new wars, climate change, I would rather even say climate catastrophe. And I believe that neither economy, nor politics or politicians, and nor our laws and especially our constitutions are prepared for this. For example, I'm right now working on a project to look at the Austrian constitution, whether it is prepared to fight climate change and all those new wars, for example. And well, the project is not finished yet, but I can already say that so far we have found out, no, we need to change something. This does not mean that we have to change all our constitutions, but some things, of course, will have to change also in our laws. Next one. And in that relation, it is also quite interesting what the latest Eurobarometer that was only published a few weeks ago, and the survey is from April and May of this year, what that one found out about the emotions of the people in Europe right now, about their opinions, especially economically, media-wise, and even more so on the Ukrainian war. And well, nearly 60% believe that the defense of our common European values are more important than maintaining the same prices that we have, which is to me quite astonishing because the cost of living obviously is rising a lot. Next one. And more than 80%, as you can see, agree that everything that brings the EU together is more important than everything that separates us as European citizens, which of course is also very, very good news. And then, but in the next slide, we can see that at the same time, also 60% are not ready to face a tremendous rise in the prices, neither in food nor energy, of course. This is not a surprise, but it is surprising if we look at those percentages and if we compare them. Next one. So uncertainty is the thing that we feel all over Europe right now, and that of course plays back to the democracy that we live in. So already nearly 90% believe that the Ukrainian war might change their living standards or has done so already. And 60% are not convinced that their life might continue to be unchanged. So they believe that everything is going to change. Next one. I would like to compare that to a small survey that was done by the Austrian newspaper Der Standard just a few weeks ago. It was a bit more than 1,000 persons who were asked, which compares to be representative to that part of the population that is allowed to vote, which of course we know excludes a lot of people and not only children. So there in that survey, it was found out that for the vast majority of the Austrians, the solidarity with the Ukrainian war really stops as soon as the prices go up and the fight against the inflation is much more important for them than the solidarity with Ukraine, and all that what we call the fight for the European democracy. So you can see we have a lot of opinions, and even in surveys like the Eurobarometer, we can say, or we can see that sometimes the opinions contradict each other, and somebody who might value the democracy in Europe and the solidarity with Ukraine at the same time are not able to accept a change of price, which of course might have to or will have to do with economic issues, not only with what we feel and what we want. So it is about necessities. And this is rather, this altogether is confusing if you look at what is the perception that the people have of democracy right now. Next one, please. So a lot of our perceptions, and I say our, because I know that the we is one of the most dangerous words that we can have, because a we always produces a they, and that of course means there is an exclusion, and this is really what the pandemic was about. So we can see that in all the surveys, we can see that in all the studies that have been produced during the last 2 years, that obviously the population was split. Not only in Austria, we can see that in many, many countries. So opinions, even within the families, have split up. And I don't think that all those attitudes only came up with the pandemic, but I think that the pandemic made it more visible that we live in an era where a lot of things, in our opinion, are changing, and very, very often politics have to do much more with emotions than with the so-called facts. Next one, please. And while this slide might look quite funny, when we look at the fact that some people believe that the earth is flat, it indeed is a tragedy. And I can see it even in my field. Some people who are even academics right now believe that maybe the earth is flat. So conspiracy theories are no longer a joke. They really have started to become a threat for democracy and for the way how we live together. Next one, please. So the question is always, when we talk about democracy and how we perceive it, who is constructing the realities that we believe in? Who is constructing it for whom? And of course, who in the end benefits politically? Next one. For example, the European Council on Foreign Relations also just a few weeks ago in May published a survey that I found rather interesting, considering the opinions towards the Ukrainian war. And we can see that in Italy, where the official television broadcasting channels invite a lot of people from Russian media. There, the opinion that the main responsibility for the outbreak of the war is, well, their opinion is rather that, or less, that Russia is responsible than in Finland, for example. Of course, it also has to do with neighborhoods and so on. It has to do also with a huge community, Ukrainian community living in Italy, and the Italians being, or some Italians, well, indeed, probably, if you look at this survey, a big part of the Italians are afraid that this community will grow bigger, so more migration and so on. But all of that influences how we, as the European population, think about the war in Ukraine, and then, of course, how we perceive our democratic opinions and how that plays a role, or whether we think that only the politicians decide how our democracy goes on. Could we go to the next slide, please? Because this, to me, is the most important survey that I've seen on that topic during the last weeks, and this is also from the European Union. It shows how people think about the Ukrainian war, and I think it also will show us the consequences, because we have 35 people who are that are called the so-called peace camp, and the peace camp are those who say no more weapons, let's just force both sides to come to a peace agreement. Whereas there is the justice camp that is slightly smaller, with 22% of the population, that say, okay, we need justice, and somehow this is an unjust war, so we need to support the Ukraine, and somehow Russia should not win. And then we have altogether 43% who either do not want to give their opinion or say, well, it is an unjust war, but still we need peace, and who are not sure what to decide yet. And just imagine if 43% of the population turn against everything that is done by the different European democracies towards the Ukrainian war. Of course, that will have consequences. Also, this might trigger more people going to the streets and demonstrating. So, of course, we will have a bigger challenge, and the first surveys already show that the solidarity with Ukraine slightly goes down. Next one, please. So if we look at all that, how we perceive the Ukrainian war, how we perceive the future, but also how we perceive democracy itself right now, the thing is always that the reality of how democracy looks is not so much a danger, or the reality of the political situation is not so much a danger of democracy, but the perception of that reality is. So whatever we think, whether it is facts or not, what we believe in constructs our reality. And of course, that triggers reactions, and that, of course, has consequences. Beg your pardon. Next one, please. So very often at the beginning of the war, it was discussed in European media over and over again what the perception of Mr. Putin is towards Europe, towards the NATO, and so on. And of course, whatever he thinks about the European Union and the NATO will trigger his consequences. But that is not only true for the two presidents and the governments, but this is also true about the population. Next one. So, for example, how we want to look at the media, and I think this picture, and I found it in the European magazine newspaper, in the German newspaper, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and I think it very, very well shows how we want to see the world, because we know that on the internet, a cat is much more important, and people prefer to watch that than any other topic. So in the background, we have the war, we have all the horrible things going on, we can be witnesses of that, but then there is a cat, and the journalists show us the cat. Not all of them, but some do. And then that, of course, means that it comes back to that, what is the responsibility of the journalists, and then that triggers our responsibilities. For example, the media should inform us, they should control, and of course they should give some entertainment, otherwise the people would not watch the news, but then of course what we get presented as population and as different parts of population triggers our perceptions, and of course plays a consequence on how we look at democracy. Next one, please. So Studies have found out that it is not so much a problem if we do not know much about a situation. For example, if we do not know so much about the Ukrainian war, the problem is the superficial knowledge. That is a problem, and that of course has consequences for democracy. So everything, for example, if we believe something and don't really have the facts, then of course that will trigger how we look at democracy. Next one. This brings us to the Dunning-Kruger effect. Of course, I know that this effect has been disputed a lot, and I think it has some reality in it, because it tells us that those who do not know much also, of course, cannot know how much they do not know. So it is rather the same as Socrates already said thousands of years ago, that he knows what he doesn't know, or he does not know what he knows. And it is exactly that. So all that kind of information that we believe we have to make our own image of the state of democracy. This is what counts. And whatever we then as researchers come in and tell the people does not play so much of a role. Also what the politicians tell us does not play such a role. The thing is, whatever we believe in, so we create our own images. And as Einstein already said a lot of years ago, is we can only see what we have learned to see. So we can only understand what we are willing to understand and what we want to see. Next one. And that, of course, has consequences for the way how we are living together. It is also quite interesting to see, especially towards the state of democracy, that human beings are easily able to shift the facts that they learn about if it is about somebody they like, or if their moral beliefs are at stake. For example, it is very, very easy to believe that a politician whom I do not like, that he did something criminal, that he lies at me, that maybe he is even corrupt and so on. Whereas if I really like a person, or if I believe in a person, if I believe that person could also save me politically, to put it that way, that person, I would never believe that this person is able to do something bad. We could only say, or we could also say that, of course, somebody we like on a private basis, we never believe that they do something wrong, but the others, those we don't like, they would. So this ability to shift the facts in a way how we feel better then, of course, plays back again at democracy. Next one, please. So this leads us to a state of mind where very often people say, well, I understand something has to change and opinions need to change. We need to be flexible also in our democracies. But then again, if it comes to me, I do not want to change. So please let only the others, sorry for the typo here, let the others change their opinion, but please not me. Next one, please. So there is a question whether democracy can be considered as a plastic word. We all know this image. It is a hamburger by a very famous enterprise, and it is not about this enterprise, but we all know how the bread works. So if you squeeze it, it goes down, and if you then let go, it blows up again. So it is like plastic, and a lot of that is also true for how we perceive democracy. We think that we can concentrate on our own freedoms, our own rights, but then the responsibilities, we don't want to take that. The thing is, democracy is not like a hamburger. Democracy takes damage if we squeeze it too much, if we only concentrate on what we want to do instead of what we can do. Or what we also have to do, considering our responsibilities. Next one. So very often we hear that democracy is dying, that democracy has been in a crisis for many, many years. And I remember long before the pandemic started, in research in the academic world, we were discussing all the crises of democracy. And the thing is, I do not believe that we do anything good by always repeating that we are in a critical state of democracy, because I really believe that democracy is developing, and it is changing, of course, with the way how we treat it and how we work on it. And democracy is nothing comfortable. Democracy means a lot of work. And if we constantly say that it is dying, that we are in a crisis, I think that also influences the citizens and the way how they perceive democracy. Next one. So we can already see it that not only in Austria and not only in Germany, in several countries of Europe, we can see that on the regional level, less and less people want to become politicians, because there is this image of the corrupt and the negative politicians, so they don't want to go for it. For example, in Austria, in several villages, they cannot have elections for the mayor again, or at the moment, because nobody wants to be the mayor. And that, of course, is not only a symbol of a crisis, but of course, it is really problematic. On the other hand, we have, and that brings us back to that image in Sri Lanka, we still have on a worldwide level, and then of course also in Europe, many privileges that the elite, not only politicians, but the elite has in comparison to the majority of the people. And of course, there is some injustice and people can see it, can understand it. And of course, that causes problems. So next one, please. I believe that this dystopia of democracy where we are in right now is not yet a reality. I think we can see all the signs that yes, democracy is at stake, but it is not dying yet. This mostly happens in our very often intellectual heads, because it is always, I have to admit, very interesting to play with that idea, what would happen if, and so on. But I think instead of always paint those negative images, I think it would be rather good also for academics, also for politicians, to involve the population. And this picture, for example, is from a democracy project that I did together with 2 universities in Italy, and they showed that people are willing to work on democracy, and they really want to contribute. They want to invest time if you just give them a chance, and if you just give them the tools to also do so, which to me includes media literacy, and then of course civic education. And we come already to the next and last slide. There are some more images on that, and you can see that people also have fun if we give the population a possibility to do something and to really work on it. And one of the sentences that I heard most of all, and I also do a lot of oral history interviews on the perception of democracy, and every single person until now has told me in the end, thank you very much for listening. I'm grateful that somebody listened to me. And if we come to the very last slide, I would also like to say thank you for listening to me now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the work.
No, not at all. And I would like to say, first of all, of course, thank you for jumping in. Second of all, I don't think that this was a replacement keynote lecture. It was a real perfect keynote lecture for our project. Nobody will believe me when I say my closing words, but they are echoing a lot of the things that you have mentioned. So this was really the perfect framework for our final conference here. I would like to ask you a question before there's also the possibility, of course, of the audience to ask a question. I have a very short one, but probably not so an easy one. We started this project in 2019. And the project is called From Fictional to Functioning Democracy. It was for us clear that we will not solve the challenges of countries and administrations that mask as democracies, but we started out slightly differently in 2019. A lot has happened in between. What would you say are the differences if you would look back to 2019 and where we arrived now with regards to democracy? What is the summary that you would give, if that is actually possible?
Wow, this is a tough question. Thank you very much. To me, the most surprising thing was how people started to waking up and standing up for their beliefs. And I have to admit that, of course, a lot of those demonstrations I perceived as very, very negative, with a lot of aggression, and then of course, totally against academic knowledge. But still, I think we have a huge potential here to so people are not sleeping anymore, because before that, very often there was this rumor that people are not interested in politics. They are interested as soon as they feel that it is about them, and we could do something with that. And we should not leave everything to the conspiracy theories. And to me, this was the biggest change in all of that.
So, but that's a very optimistic assessment then, and I'm very happy about this, because normally when people look back over the last 2 years, it's always, well, can we get back to where we were? And you know, this life is not going to return as it will be. But I think the best way to tackle this, and that goes also for our political system and our political future, is to see those opportunities. And I think this is a very good starting point also for the following discussion. Are we having questions in the room here? Yeah, don't be shy. Come up front so people can see you. We want to be sort of inclusive, also in that sense.
Where I can see.
Here, see it. You can see. Yeah, okay. Wonderful.
Okay. So thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting, in fact. I have a strange question.
Go for it.
Yeah, because in the presentation you mentioned the word dystopia. And in that moment, I opened my laptop to search what dystopia is. Because I know the utopia, and I read the book of Thomas More that describes what utopia is. And since I am a researcher in the field of transitional justice and communism and dictatorial regimes are the basis of my research. When I learned about how communism started, it was because people wanted some kind of utopia, and are now in the moment, in a historical moment, that are now the population searching no more for utopia but for dystopia, and are the problematic democratic systems the cause for this? So for this disappointment of populations. So that's why I said strange. I don't know how much I described what I had in my head, but I hope I was clear, and you can give me my opinion.
Yeah. I would also prefer to talk about More's utopia. I just think that right now we can see we read a lot about on the media and in academic books about the dystopia, and in the end, dystopia is nothing else than the description of, if we translate it into English, it is only the place where we do not want to live, or the place that is uncomfortable to live. And I think that a place without democracy, or a region without democracy, would really be rather uncomfortable, to say the least. And this is exactly what the people feel. So if you are disappointed by the government, and if you have the feeling that nobody's listening to your needs, to what you think, what you believe in, then of course you do not feel well. And then it is very, very hard to even imagine something like utopia, but you are struggling. And then of course, if we look at the situation now, where less and less people are able to live on their salaries and so on, it gets more and more comfortable. So there is this kind of dystopia, and it will be the biggest challenge to give the population the feeling again that not everything is going down, but that we have chances, that we can work on something, and that there is not everything is lost or will be lost. And I think this is going to be the biggest challenge. And not only the politicians, but also everybody else has to understand that, I believe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Daniela, Ingelbert, do we have a bit more time for another question, or do you? Yes, is there another? No? Okay. Then I would have some final remarks. Again, thank you very much for giving us these insights and setting the floor for our final conference of this project. I hope that we will be going much more towards and discussing much more utopias than dystopias in the future. I can only say thank you so much again that you took your time, that you shifted around your schedule to be with us today. I think it was a very, very, very valuable input for our discussion. And I'm very happy that we will be able to continue cooperating here, especially within your capacity at the University for Continuing Education and in our capacity as the Institute for the Danube Region in Central Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And if you allow, I would like to stay on a silent level until the break, because I'm really interested in your findings.
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. Thank you so much. So we are then coming to the presentation of the results. And yeah, as I said, we have here a little bit an improvisation of things. I will now hopefully be able to show you my presentation. No. Try again. No. All right. This is okay. Sorry. Yeah, as I said, the project that you now hopefully can see. Yes. Okay. Yeah, we have the delay here, but should be good. I mean, at least you can see it here. Yes. Wonderful. Okay. So yes, our summary of the project findings and results. Please don't expect too many final results, because they are more or less open. It has been quite a process over these times, as you can imagine. I mean, we started with a huge kickoff conference in January 2020. And then shortly after, no more conferences were actually possible. So we had to shift around in our project the formats that we have done, but I'm very proud to be able to say that ultimately we have managed to implement everything that we have planned, and even more so. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the project, the rationale, the key points, and the objectives, before I then get into the different project results, and then we move on to the next part, which is the democracy talk number 5. So at the very beginning, I want to show this map. It's going to be important, an important element at the end of my summary and the conclusions and the outlook. So please keep it in mind and remember it until then. There's just one point that I would like to point out. When we started that project, the democracy status, according to the Freedom House Index, which is an index that monitors on several factors how freedom in the world is developing since the 1970s, we see that in Europe, a record low, only 10 out of 29 countries were classified as democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, not in overall Europe. You see what is highlighted here in our target region. And the situation here is, of course, very alarming, and we need to keep that in mind, as I said, when we further talk about this. When we developed this project thought is that especially these erosion tendencies of democracy were something that we were very struggling with, because it's from the rationale of also the scope of what the IDM is doing was always that we are, of course, fostering democratic development. We are fostering European integration, and within European integration, that means per se that the democratization process has been fulfilled and should not be reversed. But we see these processes and we see these developments, and this is something that we tried to address with this project, and also with the further EU enlargement and the challenges that are happening in our neighborhood, when we see that there is something like, we could define it as tribalism that is challenging the European integration, and also at the same time undermining the very values that the European Union stands for. So we were trying to scrutinize the context and causes of illiberal, respectively fictional democracies, as we call it here. We wanted to develop concepts and strategies of strengthening liberal and respectively functioning democracy and the functioning political communication, as well as active citizenship, and in an inclusive and participatory view, and disseminate these findings through awareness-raising activities on various levels, not only in Austria, but in our region and international. So we did research on these topics. We partnered up with the Danube Rectors Conference, a network of 65 universities all over the Danube region, and with the various activities, one of them currently still going on, the DRC Summer School. We are not only trying to find the answers to our questions, but also disseminate the results. And the results that we have are not only events that we did, but also our publications and communications. I would like to start, of course, with our printed newsletter, where we have posted all updates on the project during the project period, that is sent out still in a printed and physical form to our members and cooperation partners, but also, of course, available on our website. There's an additional website especially dedicated to the project, which you can find at idm.at/FIFUDEM. Have a look at the rest of our website as well, because it's brand new, and we're very happy with the outcome of this as well. And we have also published a volume of the Donauraum, which is the scientific journal of IDM, and within this, which is called Democracy is No Fiction, we published the results of our kickoff conference that I mentioned was held in January 2020. We have with this several articles that were written, amongst others from participants of that conference, and we have also brought some copies here in this room. You can order it off the website. No open access yet here, but we are working also on this. And then when we look at an article contribution that was meant here, when referring to liberal democracy, we imagine what the Solidarity Pact calls a vibrant democracy, and it means more than voting every few years. Instead, to keep a democracy of which civil society is an inherent part, vibrant, constant mindfulness and engagement is necessary in the Caucasus as well as in Austria and other EU countries. And I think this is one of the very, it's a very good summary of the findings that we that we had here after our kickoff. We also had then produced special issues dedicated to topics that are in the framework of this program in the science communication journal Info Europa, which is published together with the Austrian daily Die Presse and circulated in an edition of around 50,000. We had the first issue dedicated within the project was in 2020 on the occasion of 100 years of the Austrian constitutional law, which is called Spielregeln der Macht, or Rules of Power, where we also have the president of the Austrian Constitutional Court, Christian Martin, who wrote a preface for it. A second one, and this is something that we will later on get in a little more depth into, because we have authors present of that Info Europa for our discussion. The second one that we published here in 2021, roughly a year ago, was Rescue Plans for Democracy, and the preface written by the EU Commissioner Dubravka Šuica, where we talked about, amongst others, the good governance of the Western Balkans, reform of the EU institutions, fight against corruption in Ukraine, political education in Bulgaria, protest movements in Czechia, and direct participation in Budapest. Info Europas are available digitally on our website. You can use the e-reader paper to access it. And then, of course, task of it is also to summarize our findings and communicate them to political decision makers through policy papers. We have produced over the course of this project period a couple of them. Two of them have been, once again, especially dedicated to the project itself. And the one is why the Western Balkans should join the EU immediately, where we argue together with our late chairman Erhard Busek why we believe that a political accession of all Western Balkan countries should be done immediately, that we change the logic of an enlargement from a, first of all, economically driven to a rather politically driven procedure. Because if we think about it, and this is also echoed in another policy paper that was recently published, where we call for a greater European Council, which would serve not as an alternative, but as an accompanying process where countries can take over political responsibility. Because if you think about the European integration process, it has most of the time not been a economically driven process, but it has been, in most cases, actually a democratically stabilization effort process. The first enlargement, more or less, was of course economically, but then later on with Greece in 81, Portugal and Spain in 86, and then also the enlargement, especially in 2004, respectively 2007, was mainly fostering democratic development rather than economic gain. And what we also looked at, something of course that is a result of the situation that we are in, is homeschooling, hybrid learning, and classroom teaching, COVID-19, changing things for good. Because within this this project, apart from the mentioned kickoff conference where our keynote speaker Ivan Krastev held a speech in the House, the EU, the House of the European Union in Vienna, we had several other formats that we used to discuss and also debate the challenges that lie in front of us. One was, for instance, the Young Scholars Forum in 2020. Another edition will be held also this year. We back then were asking ourselves, what are European narratives? And we were searching for common diversity 2 issues of the Donauraum have been published in conjunction with this Young Scholars Forum as well. And then we also had these trainer seminars, or rather teacher seminars, that we decided to hold 2 times within the scope of this project, because we were only able to meet online. The first one happened in February 21, and the next one in February 22, where we talked about with teachers, multiplicators, and brought together experts and inputs, and discussed about the challenges for democracy, but also their chances, as well as how the European integration is currently looking like, when we looked back into the history, but also gave an outlook into the future. And in conjunction with this, the aforementioned policy paper was published. We were also unfortunately not able to physically hold the DRC annual meeting, which should have been also part of it. In 2020, we switched completely online. In 2021, we at least were able to hold it in a hybrid format together with the University of Uzhhorod, one of our 2 Ukrainian DRC members. And as the Danube Practice Conference is also a project partner, this was of course something that was very important for us here as well. And there we talked about the role of university and its resilience in the age of global challenges. And then we also promised that we would have a seminar that we would hold in Bratislava, and we managed to use the opportunity to partner up with our good friends in Bratislava from Globsec. And we just recently, during the Globsec Bratislava Forum in June, had a panel discussion about what next for Europe, from the Conference of the Future of Europe to a new reality, with again a high level panel discussing with former politicians and former decision makers, but also policy experts about the way forward. And then last but not least, I said, it was originally planned that the DRC Summer School 2020 is part of this project. And then for obvious reasons, we had to postpone. For another reason, we had to postpone again. So we are very happy that we are now being able to implement it, although we actually would not be here with the DRC Summer School, because the plan was, once again, to be in Uzhhorod. This time, not the pandemic is preventing us from holding it there. This time, the absolutely senseless aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine is preventing us from being there. But this is not a substitution. This is just a temporary relocation, and we are, and if it takes another couple of attempts, will be at a certain point in time in Uzhhorod with our initiatives. And then, last but not least, of course, this final conference that we have made part of not only the summer school, but also of the DRC Strategic Foresight Project now is happening here, and brings together one more time the different findings, the different discussions, before we then prepare our final report and publish this in by the end of September. We have, of course, sent out a lot of newsletters, not only for the DRC, but also for the IDM. We are active on social media. You can find us with the handle on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, IDM Vienna. And if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to that newsletter and also follow our social media so that we can stay in touch, but also continue the exchange here. And since we came into that situation that we weren't able to physically implement in the first year, and then also in the course of the second year, certain planned formats in a physical presence, we started to introduce something that we call the Ibm Democracy Talks. So within the framework of the project, we have been holding 4 of them so far, with also very renowned experts on topics like nationalism, civil society, extremism, solidarity, education, and also history. And we will conclude that with a 5th edition of the Democracy Talk, which is called Let's Talk About Anger Management. And also again here, even if it may look like staged, what Daniela INGRUBER has been talking about, that was not actually pre-agreed. So it fits very nicely in that framework, I would say. And at this stage, I would like to hand over to Melanie Jandl, who is going to replace Daniela Biden as the moderator today, and ask our 2 panelists, Thomas Borwalk and Daniel Martinek, to the stage as well. Oh, we have a coffee break. Ah, okay, yeah, okay. So I don't want to deprive the people of the coffee. So anyway, I told you who is on the panel physically. We also have the winner joining us online. But before we do so, we have a short coffee break of 15 minutes. So stay with us. And if you're here, grab a cup of coffee and then be back in 15 minutes, 3:15. Thank you very much.
And welcome to our Democracy Talk number 5 with the title Let's Talk About Anger Management. I want to say welcome to everybody who made it and came here today, but also for everyone who is joining us online. My name is Melanie Jandl. I'm assistant editor at the IDM, and I'm jumping in for my colleague Daniela Biden today. So in the previous month, Sebastian has already explained, we had several of these expert panels that explored the weak spots of fictional democracies in Europe. And today we want to once more in this democracy talk steer away from questions of terminology and theories, and actually really suggest concrete actions for strengthening functioning democracies in Europe. So why did we choose this title, anger management? Well, we believe that experts and also policymakers often look for reasonable and rational arguments that can explain the decay of democracies. But while we human beings are reasonable people, we are also emotional people. We think in the last years, for example, during the COVID pandemic, this has really shown how emotions can guide democracies, but also can threaten democracies. We see people protesting in the streets against COVID policies and again, like channeling their frustrations against decisions of their policymakers. But it's not only happening in Europe. We've also seen it in the United States, for example, with the attack on the Capitol. So we realized that a democracy needs not only scientifically educated people, but also emotionally educated citizens and politicians who can cope with these collective emotions and memories. So therefore, I'm very happy to welcome 3 different experts in the fields of democracy. And I'm curious what they have to say about today's question. So virtually with us today is Dr. Petrova. She is a research and project assistant at the Sofia Platform Foundation and also project coordinator at the Civics Innovation Hub. So good afternoon, Ms. Petrova, and welcome and thank you for joining us today. Then on my left-hand side, I have Thomas Borwalk. He's managing director at the KDZ, the Center for Public Administration Research, and also a member of the IDM board. So good afternoon, Thomas.
Hello.
And last but not least, I'm welcoming my colleague Daniel Martinek. He is a research associate at the IBM and has contributed extensively to IBM publications on the issues of populism, transformation, and just recently on the crisis of representative democracy. Hello, Daniel.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
So we will start this democracy talk with 2 questions rounds, and then we'll give the opportunity to raise questions from the audience. Also, to everyone who has joined online today, please feel free to raise your questions in the comment section. So I want to start with a question and some introductory statements of our panelists today about where do you detect current shortcomings of European democracies, and which concrete cases or developments show weaknesses related to the anger and frustration of people. And maybe I would invite Ms. Petrova to start with her introductory statement.
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me. The connection is a little bit slow, so I didn't want to jump in and say hi earlier to not interrupt you a couple of minutes later than actually saying the words. But thank you and congratulations on the wonderful initiative. A couple of words about myself. My name is Dobrena Petrova. As you mentioned, I'm a research and project assistant at the Sofia Platform Foundation, which is based in Sofia, Bulgaria, and a project coordinator at the Civics Innovation Hub, which is a pan-European organization based in Sofia, Zagreb, and Bonn. Past couple of years, I work both on the research and mapping level and practical level of civic education and capacity building in terms of democracy, both in as well the local international level in Bulgaria and international and European level. Shall I pause here for further introductions, or would you like me to jump straight ahead into the question?
You can give your answer if you want to, please.
Great, thank you. So I'm not gonna spend too long time on the the obvious shortcomings of European democracy, as they have already been talked about in the conference. Rise of more and more liberal leaders being elected, variety of issues related to media transparency, corruption, erosion of rule of law and whatnot. But I'm gonna share with you a couple of thoughts from my work, which is related to a particular type of shortcoming of democracy. One that is related to local peripheral areas and the different type of democracy and civic life that is happening there and the different challenges that democracy is facing there. I'm talking about a few places that we recently termed so-called civic deserts. And we particularly looked at 4 examples as case studies of such a place, but that's a term that could also, have practical applications in many other areas. So briefly, civic deserts are places that are perceived as offering few to no opportunities to actively participate in and learn about civic life. And that is mainly because of 2 factors, which are deficient civic infrastructure and low civic literacy. So that has to do with opportunities for engagement. It has to do with actually having the people, non-governmental organizations, informal groups being their networks among them, places for them to actually meet and engage in civic and democratic life. But also civic literacy touches on not only the infrastructure, but also the knowledge, skills, and competences in general. And here I'm talking about both the citizens in general, but also civil society organizations, local and national institutions themselves. A very important aspect here is also the understanding of people themselves as active citizens who can make a difference. Something that Daniela touched a little bit earlier upon, the perception of democracy itself and the perception of citizens as actors in those democratic processes. So anecdotal evidence brought us to looking at four such places in Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. And we looked at what are the different challenges there, and how civic life happens, what are the attitudes towards democracy, and so on. Very quickly to also note that the term is quite strong, and I'm aware of that civic deserts is a very strong word. So that's a term not meant to judge, nor to represent an actual, true, very polar reality. You know, very often you would have a complete civic desert on one end with no opportunities for democratic engagement, and you would, at the same time, very often have the absolute positive end of that spectrum. But it's something that's meant to bring people's attention to that particular type of issue, which is very different on the local level compared to the national and the European level in Central and Eastern Europe, but also beyond. So these areas are, we noticed, similar in some respects, which is that they're remote often, they're peripheral areas, they're close to so-called magnet cities. So very often there's also no people there. There's dealing with the population or aging population, poverty and social exclusion, stagnant economies, corruption, and so on. But the key part that is identifying the different extent of those challenges that the different examples of civic deserts are facing, because all of the challenges are present to a different extent, particularities are very different. But what is mostly central is that very often just people are not there in the first place. And if they're there, they have very other different things on their mind than participating in democracy. First of all, because of, as I mentioned, the population and economic stagnation, but also because of the lack of opportunities to do so. So what this means is that in such similar areas, democracy is probably more easily weakened, and illiberal ideas are very much more likely to take hold compared to other parts of the countries in Europe, because in those areas people feel left behind, people feel unheard, they're having not a lot of opportunities to engage, and if so, communication with local institutions is not proving very fruitful, is not very effective. And that is often the cause of anger and dissatisfaction with how democracy is taking place on that local level. Very often you can have examples of such characteristics of civic deserts that are not only on the local level, you can have that also in neighborhoods and urban centers, but that's a little bit of analytical framework to help us grasp the realities in it. So the other thing is that realities on that local level are very different to that of the national. And so issues that are relevant for people there are not what often meets the agenda and the political debate on the national level in capitals and also on European level. So that dissatisfaction and anger with democracy combined with very other priorities on the local level is indeed leading often to anger, but oftentimes also translate in the long term into apathy. Because as I mentioned, that element of citizens thinking about themselves as such actors who can do something, and again, as Daniela mentioned, it's all about perceptions, right? So very often, if frequently you are faced with anger and with dissatisfaction, the end result is apathy. So briefly to sum up, democracy does strongly rely on active citizens who do have the mindset, but also the capacities, the resources, and the opportunities to engage in and participate in it. Because if you don't have that, instead you have frustration, you have apathy, and these are the places where it's most easier to locate setbacks of democracy. It's easier to notice erosion where you don't have that, and in our perspective at least, makes more sense to invest in strengthening it. Thank you. I hope I didn't drag out that answer too long.
Thank you for your insights. I would now probably hand over to Mr. Prolog on the left side and would like first to ask if you have anything to add, or where you saw anger among people in your field of expertise and in your work.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I just want to give you a figure which is from my part of how to say work, quite important. It's 43%. The last Eurobarometer we heard already before, Eurobarometer, showed that 43% of the European citizens are not satisfied with the democracy, the way of democracy works in their country. 43%. This is a huge number. That's a huge figure, and I think this is reason enough and evidence enough to go deeper and to ask what is it behind. I'm coming from public administration research, so I'm not a politician. I'm not researching also politics, whatever. We come from public administration research and from good governance and asking, what can public administration do and public sector to fight against also this figure, 43%. And it's, in my view, very interesting that, for example, now also very fresh, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's not just Europe; it's the further developed countries in the world. Brought out a OECD trust survey, which, for example, one figure shows that in the OECD countries, 58% of the citizens are satisfied with the education system. And in my words, this is satisfied with the education services of the countries. So we have 43% which say we are not satisfied with democracy, and a still similar figure, because when you look from the other way, 58% are satisfied with the education system. A still similar figure with the public services. So when you ask me now about anger, and I just come from Tirana, from Albania last week, and there were also, as in all Western Balkan countries, some of you are here also from countries, there were quite big demonstrations about the different reasons, the increase of the prices, but also public services and so on. For me, it's also an issue of, how do we have to increase and to improve public services, as public administrations? And I mean, here we are in an interface to politics. To make it better, to make the services for the citizens better. And also, story from last week from Albania, I was a little bit astonished to learn in my field of work that Albania now changes its public services fully to e-government. You're from Albania, so you know it, huh? And from 1st of May. For example, this is something in many of countries I'm working with, this would not be possible. From one day to the other, to change fully all the services, all the applications to e-government. What do the old people do? What do the vulnerable people do? I mean, I know there are some answers in Albania, but I want to give you also an insight which I had at the conference, because there was a deputy prime minister saying, okay, people have to change. That's the answer. So when we are considering, okay, we have leaving no one behind, as the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind, accessibility of services. You know, we have politicians which simply say, okay, people have to change, the citizens have to change. So for me, talking about anger has a broad approach, broad picture, but also how public administration, how public sector has to further develop. This is one of my findings. Second one, I want to give you three. The other ones are shorter. Of course, we have to be aware, we don't have to be blind. We have to be aware that we have countries, neighbor countries, I mean, just, also some of you are here, and you mentioned the illiberal democracy. So we have to find a word. We don't say authoritarian regime. We don't say dictatorship or something like that. We say illiberal democracy in order to maybe also cheat on ourselves. We have to be aware of what's going on in the world. And this starts here in the region, coming from also Serbia, looking at Hungary, at Russia, at China, where we have countries which work actively against democracy. That has to be clear, and it doesn't make any sense to close our eyes on that. And we discuss about anger of the citizens and so on, and about what does it mean with social media. But we also have to be aware that, I mean, a broad and even getting broader, a group of countries, of persons, politicians are actively working against democracy. And Sebastian, you showed it with the Freedom House. I think it was Freedom House, huh? I mean, 10 of 29 or whatever. So just a small number of countries of Middle or Central Europe are, how to say, really assessed as democracies, as real democracies. Last but not least, media. So from my part of work, this is really the most important one, and also where I see that it always starts with media, with reducing media freedom. However, it means it goes simply, you know it, buying newspapers and TV stations by the government, how to say, threatening journalists. These are also things which are going on, and I also think here in my work, public administration, you know, we talk about ensuring the rights, ensuring the laws, having proper laws on media freedom, for example. And this is, let's say, my third finding where I think we should have more focus. So first, the issue on when 43% of the citizens in the EU are not satisfied with the way democracy works. This is an alarm signal. When I see how many countries are going on and work against democracy, this is an alarm signal. And first approach, first aspect of working together, and I think this is also important for the anger management, because when you have media, let's say quality media, good media, a strong media, this is really can be and is a counterpart against also anger management and what is going on social media.
Thank you. So Daniel, we heard quite some perspectives now, and you're an expert on Central and Eastern Europe. Where do you detect weaknesses in democracies, but also anger among people?
Yeah, thank you very much, Melanie. I think I have now a little bit convenient position after what we just heard, because Brenna is very much focusing on Eastern Europe. Thomas is very much involved in the process not only, of course, in the Southeastern Europe. And maybe today I would like to focus more on Central Europe, or on the countries of the so-called Visegrad 4. And why? Not only because it's my expertise at IDM, and not only because I'm coming originally from Czech Republic. So all the issues or topics related to Czechia are close to my heart. But what I'm following quite closely during the past years of my involvement at IDM are the socio-political developments in Czechia in general. And what we could see or observed in Czechia in the past years, since 2015-16, is something which goes also very much in line with the main topic of our today's panel discussion, with the topic of anger management, and that is the political or civil society movement, or you can also call it protest movement, the so-called Million Movements for Democracy, which was established in Czechia by a group of university friends back in end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And I was doing kind of research, or I was following the developments of this organization. I also organized an interview with the main protagonist of this movement, which was then eventually part of this edition of Info Europa, which has been mentioned before during the project presentation, where we discussed not only the state of democracy in Czechia, but also what are or have been the rescue plans of this organization when it comes to the situation in Czechia. And why was this organization or this movement actually established? The reason for that was that these young people were simply not satisfied with the way where the Czech politics were heading, in the way that the parliamentary elections back in 2017 has been won by Andrej Babiš. I don't know if you are familiar with this name, but it's a businessman coming from Slovakia, but very much operating in Czechia. He owns over 300 companies in Czechia, from agriculture to food industry, chemistry. He also bought, in the meantime, the biggest media outlets in Czechia. And during the parliamentary elections back in 2017, he also won the elections with his party, ANO, and eventually became prime minister. Although the first attempt of his to form government wasn't successful and the vote of confidence didn't pass in January 2018, his second attempt was eventually successful, and he formed government together with the Social Democrats and was also backed silently, so-called silently, by the Communist Party, which is also one interesting thing or one pattern of Czech politics, that we still have a Communist Party, which was actually since 2017 part of the government, or party which supported the government. And this combination of election results and the structure of the government led this movement, this Million Moments for Democracy, to the decision that they should do something about it. And in order to do something, they try to express exactly their anger. So I would say that they managed back then pretty well to express their anger, because what they achieved was that they started with so-called moments protests. So they started with a moment for Andrej, here moment for Andrej Babiš, the back then prime minister. Then they followed with moment for democracy, and in the course of all these demonstrations, they achieved actually to organize the biggest protests in 2019, the biggest protest since the end of communist regime in Czechia in 2019, where more than 500,000 people gathered in Prague in order to protest against the government and against the political activity of back then Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. What is important, or what I perceive as important, is that they actually weren't so much successful when it comes to shape the politics, or to encourage the politicians to do something about this, to really focus on the conflict of interest Andrej Babiš had when he was involved in the politics, but also doing his business. There was, of course, this Lex Babiš, which should somehow help, which actually forced Andrej Babiš to give all his companies into trusts. That means that the plan was or the logic behind the law was that he doesn't have any power to somehow control his companies during his political activities. Of course, it was clear for everyone that this law didn't work, and of course there has always been an influence of him on his companies, and this conflict of interest simply wasn't solved during these years. However, what was a huge achievement of this movement was that they encouraged people people before the parliamentary elections, which took place last year in October. They encouraged people, to really focus this time on the personalities and on the parties, on the values they stand for, on their agendas or programs. And the achievement was that finally the parliamentary elections have been won by the so-called democratic parties. And then these two democratic coalitions formed the government. So that was the achievement. But what I wanted also to stress is when we speak about this anger management, what was really the strong and crucial role of this movement was they were successful to really mobilize the population of the Czech Republic. They were very much active on all possible levels, be it local, regional, in the capital, on national level. They did a different project which is supposed to encourage people to really get engaged with politics, to really get interested them for the politics and show them that it's crucial to be interested in the politics, that this political decision making is not about politicians, but it's about us, and eventually also about our money for them, because of course this is something which the Czech population is very much sensitive about, when it comes to money and where the taxpayers' money are flowing into. So yeah, this mobilization potential of the movement was really strong, and I think this is a best practice or good example of how you can actually manage anger of majority of the population.
Thank you. We will get exactly to this in the next question, and I think we have now a broad overview of anger and weaknesses in democracies in different fields, but also different regions. Now I would like you to just briefly pitch your rescue plan for democracy. How do we get back to constructive and respectful communication in the public sphere? And I would like to start with you, Krems. How do we get the 43% that are dissatisfied on board? How can they participate and in a fruitful and respectful dialogue?
Thank you. That's a good question. Thank you that you start with me here. I don't have to answer. That's very simple. Just maybe some aspects. This, for example, what Daniel mentioned now, for me, this is very positive. It's not anger, it's civil society was raising up and raising the voice and changing, even changing how to say the elections or whatever, dominating the elections. I think something similar happened now in Slovenia in the last months. So that's an optimistic approach. Civil society, focusing on civil society organizations. This is also what, for example, I always try to. I don't want to make philosophies here. I try to come with my experience from my work. I also try to work quite a lot with civil society organizations on monitoring public administration. For example, this is a large project which we have in the countries of Western Balkan, where it's about, okay, how transparent is public administration? How much participation is, how to say, available in public administration? And when I say public administration, of course, I mean also local governments, I mean regional governments, it's ministries. And so connected to politics and politicians. It's transparency, it's openness, it's the way of information, and how, let's say, civil society and civil society organizations can support this. Furthermore, two more things as a quick answers. Having really this open eyes, because I think we as Democrats, we are always very, how to say, we are very open in discussions, and sometimes we don't see, or we don't want to see when developments start to go into the wrong direction. And there is also this saying, okay, democracy is the only model which can, how to say, change itself through a decision of democracy. Yeah? You know, with a majority in democracy, you can also stop democracy. But we have to be more aware. So, and maybe this is then connected again to civil society. And then my last important point, when you ask me for how to say a kind of plan, it's really the media. And it's so obvious, it's so obvious, and it was also obvious here in Austria, in this country, in the last years, how there was the try of the ruling parties to decline media freedom, to get under control the media. And you know it very well, in some of the countries, this is already quite far advanced. So we have countries also in the European Union where we don't have media freedom anymore. I mean, can we imagine that? That's the basis, that's the, how to say, the fourth column of democracy, media freedom. And we don't have it anymore in, how to say, luckily, it's not many countries, but it is there. And when I go to countries I'm working with, it's about, how to say, approaching to the European Union, it's about accession to the European Union, we have the similar problem, no media freedom. And this is really where I would start, and where there needs to be much more focus.
Thank you. I would like to connect this and ask you, Daniel, and we'll get to you quite soon, Dr. But we mentioned civic society movements, and how can we avoid violent and aggressive riots, and rather channel and support as a democracy and also as policymakers maybe or experts, an environment where civic society comes together and works fruitful on ways forward?
Yeah, that's also a crucial question, and I would relate it again to this movement, Marianne's Moments for Democracy, because I think this is something they achieved during their, or they are still operating, or they are now, for example, protesting against the Russian invasion of Ukraine and so on. I think they simply achieved that in the way, or in terms that, you know, they were very much active and mobilized the population, as I said, on different levels. And we also mentioned that before, you know, I believe that it's not always only about the perception of democracy from the side of the population, but it's also very crucial, you know, for the population to understand the democracy. You know, I think this is, when I look to Czechia or maybe to Slovakia, it's always important, you know, to explain to people what is actual democracy and why people should care about democracy and why should be people involved in the policy making or in the decision making. And next to that, of course, I think also this movement always explained to the people that it's also important to voice your concerns or to raise your complaints in a, you know, human, non-violent way, so that you can simply gather in Prague and that you can protest against that. But that doesn't mean, you know, that you have to go and destroy something or attack someone and so on. And this is also something which didn't happen with all these protests, and there have been many of them. So this is the way, you know, that you should always explain to people. Of course, this is a huge task. You have to put many efforts, many time, many financial and human resources into that, as was the case also of this movement. But as I said, they're very much active on the local level. They were approaching the people, they were explaining them what is the democracy, what are the processes, what's bad about, what is the wrong thing about the government, why everybody shouldn't be in power, and so on. Explaining them what is the nature of his conflict of interest and so on. And together with that, they were also explaining how they should express their complaints or their anger or fears in that way. So.
Thank you. I think something you just said, that people need to understand democracies and their potential to participation, really feeds actually in your field of expertise, Lothar. So I would like to ask you, how can civic education boost democracy and helping people to understand their potentials for participation?
Thank you. Great question and great inputs. I think I'm really gonna mirror what was said already, and just sum that up in a couple of words from the civil society perspective, which is civic education and capacity building. Because I completely second the importance of bringing to the attention of people just how important democracy is. As well as focusing civil society efforts on monitoring public administration, transparency, participation, and from our experience and from our perspective, this really goes down a lot to civic education and capacity building. Here I mean both, civic education for the larger population, for citizens on many levels, but also capacity building for organizations, civil society organizations, informal organizations, and institutions and administrations themselves. Because our findings found that very often in reality, you have the willingness on both sides, or actually there are more than two sides to cooperate, to engage in dialogue and productive conversation about different types of issues. But very often you don't have that successful, mainly because of lack of capacities for how to cooperate in the first place. And that is, again, from all sides. So on top of that, our recipe also includes having the opportunities and the space for that. For discussion and for engagement, and again, I'm speaking about all levels. This also goes as much as it goes in the abstract level, so by opportunities and access. I mean having the inclusive and the open space for cooperation and for discussion among different parts and sectors of society. As was mentioned earlier, right, whether people participate in public administration consultations and so on, but also actually having the physical spaces to do so, because very often, especially in the Civic Desert regions that we were looking at, you virtually don't have the physical spaces for that communication cooperation to happen, or if you have it, they're in a very, very poor state. Another just quick note I want to add to that is our experience really met us with the strong lack of information and research and data available on the particularities of different levels, of different places. There's a lot of data monitoring the state of democracy, monitoring the state of media freedom, but larger portions of that are on national or regional level. And actually a lot of European policies, for example, do work on the local, on the NUTS2 level. And in the end, you don't have that information on what is topical where, what are the issues where, what is the state in that particular region, and not only information about the state of democracy, but also information about certain needs assessment is really rather missing, because investing in capacity building and civic education is absolutely something that we would recommend, right? But it's also a matter of the different types of capacities and the different types of resources that civil society might be missing in one place that is very different to another place. So any civic and democratic initiative, I think, should begin with needs assessment and further digging into actually the local realities, because they might not be what one expects. That would really help that those initiatives strengthening democracy be even more effective. But really, just to sum up, in our eyes, it really is all about capacity building, working on those skills for critical thinking, active listening, cooperation between the different types of institutions, those sets of skills that the citizens need in order to address their complaints, including administrative language and lingo, but also that type of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that civil society and organizations need to acquire in order to be able to communicate with the citizens. Top that up with the opportunities and the resources to do so, and then you have the recipe for a stronger democracy, especially on the local level.
I would now like to open the floor for questions and comments in the audience, if there are any. Just see. Does anybody have a specific question to a panelist? You want to come in front, so also then I can see you and hear it.
I thank you for your input and thank you all for your opinions. The question I have, you asked for the rescue plan for democracy, and what immediately came to my mind was deliberate democracy and things like citizens' assemblies. What do you think about that? Is that an option as like a supplement to representative democracy?
I would really like to hand over the question to our experts. Is there anybody who wants to answer? And thank you so much for your question. Yeah, it's fine. Please sit down. So anyone who wants to go first?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, the answer is easy. For me, the answer is yes. I think there needs to be also innovation in democracy. So there are many, how to say, ideas and participatory budgeting, for example, is something which we are which we really are very much working on, yeah, participation projects and so on. That's absolutely important. Sometimes I have the feeling, that it's a little bit also now let them do now. So let them do now, and we do we go on in our old in our old way. But nevertheless, democracy as we have it today, or if we will have it in 10 years, is of course different to what we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so I'm absolutely with you. This is of highest importance. I want to stop now. I have another point which maybe fits to that, but maybe the others have a say.
Yeah, maybe I could add really briefly into that, because I think when we speak about this deliberative or participatory democracy, this is actually something what we can observe also in the Danube region, because you have all these local movements, local organizations, usually for example, just to mention a few of them, Město jest naše in Warsaw, in Poland, or Zagreb je náš, in Zagreb, nedávno Belgrade, in Serbia, and so on. So you can already observe, these different shifts when it comes to understanding of the democracy. It's not always, about that we are voting in order to really elect the representatives to the national parliaments and so on. But the people, the population are also becoming very much active on the local level. That it's, that the politics and the developments around us are very much about us, and that we are like taking the action into our hands. And this also shows, the potential of so-called civil society, that all these organizations are then strong enough or has such potential that they are even able to transform into political parties. And then on the local level, they are actually starting to shape the local politics or the local developments. Maybe what I would just comment on this even further is that we are, or I would say is that we are like leaving not maybe a representative democracy in general, but also, this political parties-based thinking or perception of democracy that the people are very much not focusing maybe on the agenda of the political parties, but rather focusing on one specific issue, and and then there are all these actions of these people are revolving around this topic. So be it, I don't know, destroying of nature or some ecological issues, be it, I don't know, pollution in the capitals, be it I don't know, the situation with housing, be it some other social insecurities, be it public spaces and so on, and urban development. But I just wrote an article about it, and what I wrote there is that it's also not only case of the capitals, but it's also case of remote areas, you know, where the nature is going to be destroyed just because of the decision of the government, or just because the government is not doing anything about it, or simply find the wrong answers on the situation, which doesn't go in the line of with the interest of the people living there. So I think we can maybe observe some kind of shifts when it comes to understanding the democracy, and when it comes to the question of representative democracy.
Is there anything you would like to add, Ruben?
Thank you. Just with a couple of words, because there's very few one could add. I completely second what was already said. The answer on our end is also very, very clear. Yes, the different types and forms of citizen participation and assemblies and consultations in democracy. I'm not going to discuss the particularities, but just participation in general is, first of all, making the process more inclusive, more efficient. But not only that, just citizen participation is, as another element, also a way to heighten trust in democracy, to heighten, to have that change of shifts that in perceptions that Daniela was talking about. Because when one participates in a decision, then they're more likely to follow on the implementation of that decision, more likely to perceive it as something more important with higher stakes, more likely to monitor, and therefore have a lot more sustainability in the long run.
You still want to add something to this question?
If this is okay, yes,
Yeah,
because
sure.
I have another point. So I think this participatory democracy, however you call it, these innovations are absolutely important. That's for sure. But I don't think that they are the rescue plan. To be honest, it's a little bit like healing cancer with homeopathics. Yeah. I'm now a little bit clearer in my view. And why do I say that? Because I know so many projects, and I'm working also in so many projects which are then focused very much on the local level. So participatory democracy or participation, whatever, it works quite well on local level. Huh? When you have these discussions with the central government, with ministries, I'm now also making the story short. Huh? That was my experience, and it's not us. Huh? What should we do? What should we do as Ministry for Economics, for example, or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or Ministry of Interior Police? What should we do with this citizen involvement and participation? I'm quite happy that we see now in Austria there was on the highest level these. I'm missing now the English word. The Citizen Council for the climate change, for climate. So it shows it works. But in most cases, we have these projects on the local level, and I always see, okay, when governments are not interested too much, then they say, okay, do it on the local level. That's the first thing. There is another thing. Whenever I'm always astonished to look at the countries in the north of Europe, Scandinavian countries, about their democracies and also about their public administrations, about their approach to quite simple things like leadership, hierarchy. It was interesting, but Daniel, you said the attitude, and it was also the question of the question of the values which we had before. So I think it's really, and this goes into the civic education, I think it's really also important to have these, it sounds so easy, but what is a hierarchy in a country, in an organization? How is leadership perceived? What are the managers doing? How open are they in their municipality, in their ministry, to work together with their employees on the one side, but also with the citizens? And I really see so much differences here in the sphere I'm working in Europe, and I always appreciate what is going on in the Scandinavian countries. You cannot imagine this open leadership approach which I see there, compared to Austria, compared to Germany, and much more also than to some Eastern European countries. And I think this is important. So working also on every level against this old hierarchy approach, changes attitudes, goes into civic education, and this is, in my view, then also a driver, not an easy driver, but an important driver for raising the voice and for supporting democracy. I hope this was not too complicated now, but working against hierarchy, be more open for innovation is the important message.
Thank you.
If I may add something to that, yeah, that's actually something I completely forgot to mention, and you are fully right, Thomas. Yeah, the thing is that actually, if you have the political parties on the national level, they are also very much rooted on the local level. They are representatives which are usually also sitting in the city councils and the town and other municipalities and so on. And of course, as I said, all these movements which are then sometimes, of course, it's case by case, transformed into political parties, usually go very much against the interests of these established political parties on the local level. So therefore, they are also very much not supported by the national government or the national ruling parties. And that makes, of course, the work of these fresh or newly established civil society political parties even worse. So yeah, usually the national government is not so supportive in that regard, and yeah, that's the huge task of these organizations, also to work against this hierarchy and really to break these established structures on the local level.
So we now talked about the local level and the national level, but I would also like to take a cross-border perspective and ask, how can cross-border cooperation improve democratic resilience of the region, and what alliances do we need? So I would maybe ask you, Bogdana, to go first if you would like to.
Thank you, and a great question immediately popped up in my mind as always, a natural continuation. So in our work, we work on the local, national, but as I mentioned, also international and European level. And my experience from especially our research work is that cross-border perspective is not only an opportunity, it's also a necessity for a few reasons. First of all, because, you know, large parts of decision and policy making is already happening cross-border. A lot of civil society organizations, especially in Bulgaria and Romania from the countries we mapped, to a large extent rely on EU funding for their work in general, for project work, and just for general survival. So in that sense, it's important for actors of civic and political life to communicate across borders, but also across different types of organizations and institutions. But as I mentioned, right, it's also an opportunity, not only because that allows for a certain level of awareness and knowledge about the particular context across borders, but also it allows for actors themselves across borders to exchange, to share resources, to share complementing know-hows, and very, very important in my eyes also to discuss and to engage in open dialogue across borders and across types of institutions on common visions and strategies. for the region in general, for all of EU. So by common visions and strategies, I'm not making an argument against pluralism, don't get me wrong. But here I mean things like valuing open dialogue in the first place, valuing access to information, having access to information, the opportunity to take part in democratic life. And as we're, very large parts of our daily lives now is becoming European and globalized and cross-border, including day-to-day, consumption and products, but also finances and decision and lawmaking. It's really central to make use of that in terms of democracy and civic life. We recently, in our mapping of the so-called civic deserts, came up with the term civic cohesion, which is trying to be the positive opposite of a civic desert. So, a civically cohesive place is a place that has access to opportunities, but also the capacities and the places to participate actively in civic and democratic life. And one of our central recommendations is that as much as it's important to strengthen that sort of civic cohesion on the local and national level, it's also important to have that as a goal and as a discussion also in the region and on a European level. In reality, of course, civically cohesive place can take many different shapes and forms, but as with democracy in general, it's a process, and it's a lot more about having the opportunity and the engagement directed at it. So just to wrap up, one of our key recommendations related to civic cohesion is to include the notion as a first step to the practice into the EU cohesion policy that's already active on many different levels. So currently it's including, I think, physical infrastructure, social cohesion, and so on. But it's not taking into account civic and democratic elements of cohesion. And in that regard, this is an instrument and also a partner that could very much be coming in handy when talking about improving civic life and from that also improving democracy, again, both local level and European level. I think they go very much hand in hand. Thank you.
Would you like to add something, or Daniel, what alliances do you think we need?
Of course, also coming from IDM, I do believe that cross-border cooperation or transnational cooperation is very much important. It's also my personal perception of it, but maybe going beyond this usual purposes of cross-border cooperation, such as knowledge sharing, best practice sharing, dialogue, exchange, and so on. I think also when it comes to these issues of democracy and so on, and connecting the like-minded people, it's also very much important to maybe connect internationally or transnationally, as we can see it, for example, in the case of the Pact of Free Cities, which is already existing, which is Pact of capitals in Central Europe, Warsaw, Budapest, Prague, and Bratislava. So where you can really observe that, otherwise there will be simply islands in this undemocracy or illiberal world. But once you establish such a pact, you get simply some kind of potential, some kind of strength you can use then to really fight for the values you are standing for, and to really improve the situation, not in your capital as in the case of this pact, but also on the national level. So I think this cross-border or transnational perspective can be a fertile ground for this transnational connectivity and networking, which gives you then the potential and the strengths you can then use while working on your tasks and on your beliefs.
Thank you.
Yeah, to be positive, to be optimistic, I think we have a great treasure, which maybe we had 50 years or even 30, 20 years ago, we didn't have, and this is the social media. So social media is not just bad in the sense of, okay, it increases also maybe anger movements, but it allows new kinds of cooperations, and I think we should use that. I think we should use that, and this gives really can give new input also on democracy and democratic developments. I mean, when we look back in the Arab Spring, I mean, unfortunately, it didn't work out as maybe at least I have wished at this time, but nevertheless, it was connecting people. It was connecting people above, over borders. And I think this is still possible. And also from my work, I really appreciate this regional project where we, in the Western Balkan countries, with civil society organizations on the regional level, monitor public administration reform, and all of us learn and further develop the own, how to say, approach towards democracy, but also the own requirements. Because when you see what in the neighbor country is possible, you then also, how to say, request it for your own country. So I think there is a great value, there is a great, how to say, opportunity in it, and we should use it. But as Daniela also said, please no more study visits. Please no more just documents or whatever. It's about common cooperations, doing things together cross-border. That's the important thing. And I think digitalization is here a good, how to say, a good driver to this. Last but not least, I always look at Greenpeace, for example, or Amnesty International, and then I ask, okay, why don't we have that for democracy? Or maybe I don't know it, but I don't think we have something strong like Greenpeace, an international organization, I mean membership organization, working so strong on democracy. And for me, this goes into the direction of regional cooperation. Why not having a European democracy movement, which regional in the, how to say, we are here Middle Europe, works more and fosters more the democracy. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to open the floor again for comments and questions from the audience. Would you like to come here again?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to ask and hear your opinion. I am from Ukraine, and my question will be relevant to the events that are happening right now here. The thing is that even on Monday on the conference, we heard the kind of statistics that nowadays youth is more interested in some radical ideas. They support some controversial figures, and I heard the thought that it's because youth wants quick changes, and we have this energy, this power, motivation to change something, but still want to see these changes happening. And what I experience and what I see happening now when the war emerged is that not even youth, but all the people, even though at the beginning they were shocked and their natural reaction was some action, now it gradually fades away because people adapt to the current situation, and now a lot of people just move abroad, and so the youth moves. And bearing in mind this unreadiness of the youth to accept such complex things as war, it's not just it's far more complex issue, right, to tackle. This is a kind of very, how to say, straightforward issue about democracy. So I am, as a young person as well, feel this emotions that arise. I would also like to see some quick changes, and the problem is that we are concerned that the youth will not be ready for some accepting this reality, accepting the war, you know, and tackling with it and living in the country with the war. So my question is, what is your opinion? How can we, as a country, actually preserve this potential and somehow return or attract those people back, our youth, because this is our future? And so, what's your opinion on that? And I hope this is kind of related to the subject because, well, this is all about this anger, about these values that maybe we have different values. This distortion happens as well. So, any comments? I would be glad to hear.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
I mean, the main question is when I got it right. I mean, besides the war and I mean the question is that this is overwhelming us all. Huh? So this is so unbelievable, huh? That we all don't have the real answers. But your question was already looking into the future. Huh? So how to get all those millions who left now the country then back? Huh? So hopefully when the war is over, how to get the people back. And there I have honestly also an optimistic view. And I see, for example, in my work with the Western Balkans, I mean, there was a war also now, meanwhile, nearly 30 years ago in Bosnia, for example. And in the beginning, people were, of course, escaping, but a large number came back after the war. But meanwhile, so this is the optimistic approach. So people want to go back. I mean, it's their home, huh? And would be also ready to, how to say, to build up the country again. But what happened in the meanwhile, and this is then the negative or the pessimistic approach, and here also this is the question for Ukraine. The political situation is a very critical one. In the last 20 years, there was no economic development, no democratic development, no, how to say, proper political development, and also social development, so that people now start again to leave. So this will be the main issue also in my view for Ukraine. I think it will not be so problematic that people come back, but it will be problematic to hold people there when, how to say, the next 5 years or next 10 years, there is not a development into the right direction. This will be the main, how to say, the main critical factor, besides, of course, that the war somehow stops. Huh? That's the positive and the optimistic and the pessimistic view. So it's a task for the European Union, in my view. I was here in Vienna. We have the Vienna Institute for International Economic whatever, WIEW. They celebrated 30 years of anniversary, and there was a big discussion about it. It was clear there needs to be a large support of the European Union in, how to say, building up the country again, which is so so needed, and this will be the basis for then people going back and starting again the life in Ukraine or not.
Yeah, well, the issue is as well, like if the war will become reality, sadly, we will still need some capacity, to continue to actually to fight for democracy.
Yes.
And this is as well kind of issue how to preserve those values in people as well as in the youth.
Mm-hmm.
If I may follow up on this, because this is also something you mentioned at the very end of your question, and you mentioned that youth has also different values, and I think this is also one crucial thing about the youth, because we can hear nowadays that everyone, every organization, be it the EU or any other national levels, are promoting the youth and young people as the future of the country. But I think a part of that we have to always recognize that the youth also has as a category of population has different views, different perceptions, different values, and that these values it's possible that they simply don't go in line with our values and don't correspond what we perceive should be in the future of my country, your country, Ukraine, and so on. So yeah, I think this point is also very crucial to consider, that you have to always keep in mind that the youth doesn't necessarily mean that the post-war Ukraine will go in the direction, democracy, democratic development of the country, social security, economic improvements, and so on. We have the youth as such is a really diverse group of people with different values and views. And I think this is something we should always recognize and bear in mind. Also speaking from my personal experience.
Dr. Now, what would you say? How can we keep up the motivation of young people in desperate situations?
Thank you, and a very difficult question, I must say. What I'm thinking about now is more a very distant parallel from a Bulgarian perspective I could share with you. Of course, it's not very good to make that parallel comparison with the war, but in terms of young people moving away and back, I think maybe it could serve with some food for thought. So around the pandemic in Bulgaria, we noticed a lot of young people that have moved abroad beforehand. Not for war, thankfully, but for general reasons such as dissatisfaction with democracy, poor economic opportunities, just few opportunities for development in general, who had moved abroad for studying, for work. So in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw large numbers of them returning to Bulgaria. Because suddenly when you had that a little bit more equating of the daily life, polls said that they felt it would make sense, it would be more attractive to come back to especially even rural areas in Bulgaria rather than staying abroad. So what I'm trying to say with this is that I am also seconding that natural desire of people to return home, even keeping in mind the different reasons that in the first place they have left. But I do believe as well that people do have that natural will to return home. What is important, as also Mr. Prorok mentioned earlier, is about keeping them there afterwards. And that, I'm not sure I can calmly say whose task it is, but I think it all goes down to opportunities for, a calm life, opportunities for development, just opportunities for employment, and opportunities for education, opportunities for participating in civic life and in democracy. So when people, especially young people, as you said, they do want a quick fix, and whenever a quick fix is not possible, I think we need to find the little and small things that work as an example that some things may be gradually improving and maybe gradually working for them. I don't know if that helps much, but just as a perspective from my end as well. Thank you.
I would now jump to our final round of questions, and it's some more personal questions. And I would like you to share your experiences of anger management in your field of work, and what you would say, what tools or skills were helpful in channeling anger into fruitful debates? So, Daniel, would you like to go first?
I was actually hoping that I will be the last one, because after what we heard today, I think I find it a really nice combination, or like nice synergies here. And that's also something I've learned during the interview I did with Raj Minash as the leader of this movement I was referring to before. And that is that he mentioned in this interview that civic education and help people understand the democratic processes plays a crucial role also for the state of democracy in the country. And he follows that also with the idea of this capacity building, so that once you learn the people in schools, what is the democracy and why is it important, then you know, on the different levels you can also do this capacity building and to really convince the people that it's really worthy, you know, to be engaged and to work for the country and for the improvement of a democratic situation in the country. So this is interesting to see that I am sitting here today at a panel with representatives actually of these two areas. And this is also something we mentioned during the interview. So I think this combination of these two things, civic education and capacity building, together with active and mobilized civil society, as it was the case in Czechia, is actually kind of good basics of fertile ground for participative and functioning democracy, if we want to avoid non-functioning democracy. Of course, the next step for the movement is supposed to be to transform into political party. This endeavor, unfortunately, they didn't manage to do, but of course, very many issues are decided on a political level. But you know, to have this civic education, capacity building, and this active society as civil society is, I think, plays a crucial role if you want to improve the state of democracy in our maybe non-functioning structures and democracies in the region.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with civic education and capacity building. Maybe I'd just like to give you a specific example. So we had a participant in one of our capacity building programs in Bulgaria, which was directed at individuals who want to do a little bit of civic work on the local level. So that participant came in the program already very angry at a particular local hospital that they were not reacting at all to their project proposal. I think she wanted to improve and revitalize the wing for children, if I remember correctly. And literally they had ignored her for, you know, quite a while. So as you can imagine, that results in a lot of anger. So in our case, what happened was that the skilled facilitator who was leading the program in general helped her with a lot of attention to that particular topic, gradually identify the actual cause of the issue. It turns out that I think she was approaching the wrong, unresponsible person about that in the hospital. So naturally, they just said, "Yeah, it's not about me. I'm gonna skip that." So when you have that part of capacity building for citizens, but also for the institution, that helps you gradually identify what the issue is, then outline the clear steps to further that idea, including submit the right documents, but also engage more stakeholders to back you up, then presenting all the detailed budget documents and whatnot. And then not least also, as mentioned, even in the very far beginning of the event, it's not only about, you know, scientific and political capacity, but a lot about emotional intelligence and emotional capacity, working together with you know, facilitators and experts in the field who can, you know, help you identify the reason for the anger and then outline the clear steps to how to resolve your issue. Gradually and naturally that goes further into cooperation, then anger is gone rather than accelerate. And as you can imagine, in a couple of weeks, I think the participant and the hospital started cooperating. They actually really liked the idea in the end. And I think now at this point, the wing is revitalized and looking lovely. And the result is no longer anger, but rather the opposite.
Thanks for sharing that experience. Is there any personal experience you made in this regard?
Very individual and personal. It's respect, understanding, and trust. Meaning, really from a personal, respecting the other, respecting also the other opinion doesn't mean I have to accept it, but respecting. Understanding is maybe this, go one step further and really try to understand what the other is doing or wants, or maybe he or she is not really, how to say, able to pronounce it properly, but try to understand. And the third one is trust. So really give also trust to the other. Of course, this is maybe dangerous even, in the sense of, okay, you trust now and you don't know if it will be, if the feedback will be the right one, or if the activity will be the right one. But in most of the cases you succeed. So with this trust, respect, and understanding. That's my personal, how to say, experiences with the issue.
Thank you. So to conclude this democracy talk, I'm trying to do it in one sentence, and I think it's really ambitious because I don't think it's actually possible. But some key takeaways, I think it's policymakers need to take emotions seriously. They need to establish channels to enforce participation, and they also need to boost transparency in democratic processes. So if you here and also the ones following us online want to stay updated with events like this and our publications and educational programs, I would really encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter and also follow us on social media. Even better, you become a member of the IDM to support our work and also take part in shaping it. And I want to thank everyone, you here, and also Dobrena on Zoom for coming or like participating today and sharing your work and your experiences, and also everybody here in the room. Thank you. Over to Sebastian again for the final remarks of the day.
Thank you very much. I would say we take a picture first with all of us. So we have
With all of us, huh?
The ones on the panel. The others were. I was trying to make a smooth transition from you off the stage and me on the stage by hiding it behind the photograph, but obviously only half worked. In any case,
So
yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
you're in the middle.
that's perfect.
Fantastic.
Okay, I will take some.
Do that.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would not only like to thank the panelists, but also our moderator today, who did an excellent job, I would say, in the first moderation ever for an IDM event. So, congratulations. And now I am very much aware of the fact that it has been a very long day. It's not only the final conference that you have attended, it's also some of you who are here who have been attending the DRC summer school in the morning, and we're almost there. But allow me a few more words before we leave today. We have today actually a celebration of 70 years of the first meeting of the European Coal and Steel Community. And Right now, the European Commission is commemorating this in Luxembourg, where it took place. We are celebrating our final conference here in Vienna. If we look back at the European Community for Coal and Steel, a lot has changed actually, and we wouldn't say that things always necessarily have changed for the better. But as everything, this is of course relative, because if we think back that these 6 people that were sitting around the table 70 years ago in Luxembourg would probably not have imagined that they would sit with 27 colleagues 70 years later. But then a couple of years back, we would also not have imagined that it's only 27, because right now it should be 28, or maybe even more, 35, depending on which role we would have taken. Back then, the European Commission did not exist. It was the High Authority. The High Authority was a little bit less democratically represented, because the bigger countries, Germany, France, and Italy, they had 2 representatives, the smaller ones, Belgium, Luxembourg. The Netherlands had 1 representative, and they chose a president. And the first president of this High Authority was Jean Monnet. And this is the final conference of our Jean Monnet funded project, support to associations within the Erasmus Plus program. And we have seen with the conceptualization and the implementation that I've tried to give a brief overview, that there have been many interesting findings, many interesting results, many interesting publications, but also a lot of challenges. These multiple challenges were not only there for our project and the implementation, but especially for democracy. The dominant factor here, of course, for everything was the pandemic, but it has ultimately lead to a transformation in the things, not only how we tackle these challenges at IBM, but in general, I think it has opened up new challenges for democracy, but also possibilities to go forward. One important result of this project is, I would say, that we are able to adapt. Not only as the team that was involved in the project with finding new possibilities of implementation, but also, I think, for us as Europeans and believers in democracy in general. And we need to adapt to this. I think there will be tough times still ahead, and we need to fight for what we have achieved over these last 70 years, especially because it is challenged from within and from outside at the same time. And I think these challenges probably have never been greater to democracy over the past 70 years than they are now, to a different extent in different regions, and we should be aware of that. That a European integration process of 70 years doesn't mean that it has been equally for each and everyone who, for instance, is in this room. We have very different experiences. Me coming from Germany, alone in Germany, there are very different experiences to 70 years of European integration due to the history. And we can be glad that democracy is no longer a fiction in some of these countries. It is a reality. But we also need to make sure that the deterioration of democratic development is not only a factor in the European neighborhood, but it is happening exactly within. And here I come back to what I mentioned in the beginning with the Freedom House map. For the first time in the history of the Freedom House Index that I mentioned, in the 1970s, they are publishing the Freedom in the World score. For the first time, an EU member country did backslide from the category free to the category partially free. And that happened in 2020. It should have been a big headline. It wasn't. We should make it a big headline because it is a worrying development for all of us. We are far away from being done. And while we conclude this project, our work, of course, continues. We have had very interesting developments. It was a wonderful journey, but also a challenging one. Devastating at times. Our chairman and project leader, Erhard Busek, died in March. He is greatly missed. We have lost a great European. We have lost someone who influenced a lot of lives in our region, but also who was always fostering democratic development. He was not only on paper the project leader, he was very much interested in it, and we had regular exchanges on how to do that. He actually also chaired one of these democracy talks that we have done. And so while he will be dearly missed, we will continue to work in his spirit. And I announced it on Twitter that I have not only these sort of sobering results, but also a surprise, and I'm very happy that we will be able to continue our work in that spirit, because starting in October, we will have a successor project, more or less, within the Citizens' Equality, Rights and Values program of the European Union, which is called Towards Democratic and Inclusive Europe, the European Parliament elections and active citizen participation and contribution, together with our friends from Globsec in Bratislava, as well as Eliamep from Greece and the European Movement Ireland. Until then, we'll bring together the finding of this project. We will have the lessons learned written down and spelled out, and also put together the recommendations for the policymakers, which will be available on our brand new website, www.idm.com.at. Oh God, Malvina, who is in charge of that project, is hating me right now. idm.at, like Austria, AT, by the end of September. I would like to thank everyone who was involved, everyone who joined our panel discussions, be it as a participant online, physically present, but also, of course, the input that was given here. I would especially like to thank the IDM team, who has put a tremendous amount of work into that project. Each and every one of us was more or less involved. You see that we are also very able to adapt to short-term challenges arising, not only when it comes to possible changes of the program, but also jumping in and moderate, because these times you never know what is actually going to happen. And last but not least, of course, everyone who joined us, a huge thank you. Everyone who is in this room. 70 years ago, the EU of today was certainly a fiction. Let us work together to further realize making this vision, driving this vision forward. Thank you very much.